In order to introduce also this very busy day of work, I will give you some instructions regarding the opportunities that we have today arranged for you, meaning when you want, whenever you want, you can move during the coffee break, after a paper, between two papers, whenever you want, you can move in the room that is beside here, the Sala della Principessa, that is here, in order to try the virtual experience I mentioned yesterday. So this is basically a simulation, a virtual simulation of the mystical experience of Maria de Agreda, based on her reports and books regarding the vision she had. And it will be very useful for us. This is a proof of concept, so it's a very first tentative, very first essay in order to see. It is a proof, actually. But it's very important for us to collect your observation, and you will be, when you will be there, you will find a QR code with some is a questionnaire, basically very, very brief, so it doesn't take too much time, but we ask you to fulfill it in order to give us some feedback regarding what is to be or can be improved, or what you find not effective or very effective, and so on. But it's very brief, and we are very thankful to you if you can dedicate some minutes of your time for fulfilling. Okay, and so the coffee break, and good morning. I was just giving some instructions also regarding the Sala della Principessa, where there is the possibility to have to test the virtual machine regarding the mystical experience of Maria de Agreda. So move freely to the Sala della Principessa. You have already understood what I said. And as first, it is a pleasure for me, before introducing all of you and listening to your papers, is a pleasure for me and an honor to start with a greeting and saying happy birthday to Professor Fiorelli. Yeah? No? No. Yeah? No. Yeah, exactly, today. And to celebrate. Yeah, maybe we can celebrate also by singing and in other ways, but this is during the coffee break. And of course, happy birthday for her 25th anniversary. Yeah. Okay, and I think we can start, and thanks again. So we resume and relaunch the path we started yesterday. Yesterday we examined some, so the topic of sources, meaning what sources and the different typologies and kind of sources can explain to us or make us aware of regarding the Inquisition, the material life or everyday life of people, and more in general, the understanding of the historical reality, context, and so on. And today we move to the archive, meaning the organization of different and preservation as well of different typology of sources. That is another dimension of the materiality connected to the documentation produced by the Inquisition. And our first speaker is Matteo Lazzari, Università La Sapienza. So as you have already seen yesterday, it is very informal, the way in which we want to promote and stimulate the exchange between us. So no particular introduction or presentation of the speakers, because fortunately with the internet you can find every information you want. But we are very thankful to all the speakers, of course, and honored to have them with us. But Matteo Lazzari will introduce us with a speech, with a paper regarding the Mexican Inquisition, a history of documentation, preservation, and fragmentation across centuries. So I leave the floor to Matteo.
So thank you, Matteo, for giving me the floor. First of all, I want to thank, of course, the organizers of this Congress. And let me say that I'm very happy to be here in Naples because in my, let's say, career as a young scholar, I've been a postdoc for a couple of years here at the University of Naples Federico II, and so it's very, I'm very happy to be here another time. And before going to the content of this paper, let me also tell you that this presentation is part of my ongoing research project, which is called Afro-Mex Inquisition, HAM, and the Mexican Inquisition, Legal and Theological Reasons for the Trials of Africans in New Spain, 1524-1650, funded by the Italian Ministry of University and Research through the Young Researchers 2024 scheme. And the project is hosted by Sapienza University of Rome and the Department of History and the Afro-Latin American Research Institute of Harvard University in the United States of America. Let me now turn to the subject of my paper, and let me be provocative for a while. As the North American historian Matthew Restel has well pointed out, the history of Spanish America is plenty of historical myth, and sometimes I would say also historiographical myth. He did apply this label to a lot of legends and myths connected with the events known as the conquest of Mexico. But we all know that one of the hardest myths linked to Spanish America is the so-called Black Legend that involved also the tribunals of the Inquisition. I don't want to linger on the Black Legend, but I must admit that the Mexican Inquisition is victim of at least another legend of historiographical type, which is the spread belief among scholars that all the inquisitorial documentation is guarded at the Mexican National Archive in Mexico City, in the famous gallery of the colonial institutions, except for the nowadays well-known archival collections of the Mexican Inquisition in the Archivo Histórico Nacional in Madrid, Spain. The existence of this collection in Spain was well known also for one of the most important scholars ever of the Mexican Inquisition, Richard Greenleaf, that in his paper, Mexican Inquisition Materials in Spanish Archives, published in the journal The Americas in 1964, pointed out that, quote, although 90% of the documentation of the Mexican Holy Office of the Inquisition is to be found in the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico City, a critical group of manuscripts must be consulted in Spain if the researchers is to study the Mexican institution effectively. I confess that I've never been able to trace out where the statistics of these 90% drawn by Greenleaf came out, as he didn't present any number or data to maintain this argument. In any case, after many decades from this publication, I completely agree with Greenleaf that the documentation preserved in Spain is fundamental to the researcher. Building on this, I argue that the complementary inquisitorial documentation of the Mexican district spread in many other libraries or archives must be taken into account for a comprehensive history of this institution and what its documents can tell us on the colonial Mexican society. Indeed, the history of the Mexican Inquisition is not only a history of trials, punishments, and institutional authority, but also a history of documents. From its beginning in the 16th century until its suppression in 1821, the Inquisition in New Spain produced, preserved, and transmitted an extraordinary volume of records. These documents, trial proceedings, correspondence, financial accounts, administrative records, constitute one of the richest sources for understanding colonial Mexico and many dynamics of the early modern world. And yet, the history of these documents is itself complex. They were preserved with difficulty during the colonial period, threatened by the fragile ecological conditions of a Mexico City in its urban transition from the old capital of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan, to the huge city monster, the monstruo, as contemporary Mexicans call it, the capital of the Mexican Republic. These menaces were earthquakes, floods, and other disasters of natural origin, and later scattered after the political upheavals of the independence. In the following pages, I will outline how the Mexican Inquisitorial Archive was created, preserved, endangered, and ultimately in part fragmented, and why this history of documents is central to understanding the institution itself. A few words on the Mexican Inquisition as institution, which was an extension of the institution in Spain, which had been originated by the papal bull of Sixtus IV in 1478. The Supreme Council of the Spanish Inquisition originally controlled both the local tribunals in Spain and those in the American viceroyalties. The first inquisitorial trials in New Spain occurred well before the establishment of the permanent tribunal. Indeed, the first missionaries arrived in Mexico in the 1520s, soon after the conquest of Mexico, and they carried inquisitorial powers sanctioned by the inquisitor in the peninsula. In 1536, the first bishop of Mexico City, the Franciscan friar Juan de Zumárraga, presided over episcopal inquisitorial trials. One of the most famous trials of this period was, without any doubt, the one over Don Carlos Ometotzin Chichimecatecatl of Texcoco, a member of the indigenous nobility, which was burnt at the stake on November 30 of 1539, accused of having reverted to idolatry and of offering human sacrifice. This kind of return to idolatry reminds us of the trials against the Judaizantes, against the conversos accused of returning to their religion. So this dramatic case illustrates how episcopal inquisitors applied categories somehow already familiar from Europe. Just to show you another quick examples, a few decades later in the Yucatan Peninsula, the Franciscan missionary Diego de Landa conducted proceedings against indigenous Maya accused of idolatry. After hearing of Mayas who continued to practice idolatry, Landa ordered the establishment of an inquisition in Mani, ending with an auto de fe. During the ceremony on July 12 of 1562, a number of Maya codices, according to Landa, 27 books, and approximately 5,000 alleged Maya cult images were burned. Such events underline the anxieties of the Church about maintaining orthodoxy in recently conquered territories. While the first concerns of these episcopal inquisitions were primarily directed towards indigenous people of Mesoamerica, the progressive colonization of the New World, the institutionalization of the Viceroyalty of New Spain in 1535, and the arrival of a huge number of enslaved Africans, as well as a growing number of Europeans living in the Viceroyalty, or the frightening presence of English pirates in the Caribbean, led to many requests for the establishment of the Inquisition sent from New Spain to the King and his Council of the Indies. As a result, the formal establishment came in 1569 when King Philip II issued a royal decree founding the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition in Mexico City and Lima. The Mexican Inquisition became one of the earliest institutions of its kind in the Americas. Its legal jurisdiction was limited to Spaniards, other Europeans, Chinos, which was a broad colonial category applied to people of Asian descent, and African. Its geographical jurisdiction was very vast. It extended over the region called Mesoamerica, from Mexico to Nicaragua, and even across the Pacific Ocean to the Philippine Islands. The tribunal thus operated as a transoceanic institution, producing and receiving documents that circulated between Mexico, Madrid, Seville, Manila, but it was also in contact with other districts of the Spanish Inquisition, especially Lima in Peru and the Canary Islands. In short, we might call this a truly polycentric inquisition, embedded in a global network of inquisitorial jurisdictions. The activity of the tribunal generated a wide array of documents. Trial records contained depositions, witness statements, and sentences. Administrative documents detailed the tribunal's finances, personnel, and procedures, also of the Real Fisco de la Inquisición. Correspondence linked the tribunal with the Suprema in Madrid, which exercised overarching authority, and with the Consejo de Indias. The corpus of records created by the Mexican Inquisition was immense, stretching across typologies and centuries. And yet preservation was never assured. The Inquisition's headquarters in Mexico City faced constant threats from natural disasters. Earthquakes frequently shook the city, while floods and inundation damaged archives and buildings. Fires posed risks to parchment and paper. In this precarious environment, the Notarios del Secreto attempted to preserve the records. Let me give you an example. If we read the correspondence preserved in Madrid, it is clear that at the beginning of the 17th century, the greatest concerns of the inquisitors were the state of the tribunal's buildings repeatedly damaged by floods in Mexico City. These floods even led to the large-scale project of the desagüe, the draining of the Lake Texcoco. Inquisitors constantly wrote to the Supreme Council in order to get money to rebuild and maintain these buildings. This constant struggle with natural forces reminds us, I guess, that archives are never neutral or secure spaces. They are always fragile. As a result, what survives today is the product not only of institutional design, but also of contingency and chance. Equally significant are the practices of record keeping. The Inquisition maintained protocols, registers, and indices, such as abecedarios, seeking to organize its files for consultation and for accountability to the Suprema and to the visitors of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. These practices mirrored broader trends in early modern bureaucratic culture, where paperwork became an instrument of governance. The suppression of the Mexican Inquisition in 1821, following independence from Spain, marked a turning point in the fate of the archives of the Inquisition. The political upheavals of the early 19th century led to widespread looting and dispersal of colonial archives. The case of the Cabildo of Santiago de Guatemala is exemplary. Its early volumes from the 1530s were considered lost for almost 2 centuries. They have been only recently rediscovered in the collection of the Hispanic Society of America in New York, bearing the ex libris of a fake German librarian. The archives of the Mexican Inquisition experienced similar fates, although the dispersion and fragmentation of its records were somewhat less extensive. What is guarded in the Archivo General Nacional de Mexico is now available online, and this is a screenshot of the guide online of the archive. In addition, several documents are still preserved in Mexico City in institutions other than the Archivo General de la Nación. These include, for instance, the Biblioteca Nacional de México, located at the Ciudad Universitaria of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, and the Biblioteca Nacional de Antropología y Historia, situated on the first floor of the National Museum of Anthropology, managed by the Instituto Nacional de Historia y Antropología. But important collections of Mexican inquisitorial documents are now scattered outside Mexico. The Archivo Histórico Nacional in Madrid, and for instance, this is a picture I took the last time I went there, contains the correspondence sent by the Mexican Tribunal to the Suprema, along with many other types of documents. The Archivo General de Indias in Seville preserves communications with the Consejo de Indias, including records related to the Audiencia de México and the Audiencia de Guatemala, and these documents were produced in New Spain or in the Kingdom of Guatemala and sent to Spain. So I argue that they were not victims of dispersal. Many documents instead are preserved in the United States of America, primarily since the 19th century. Let me briefly mention some of the most important US institutions where inquisitorial documents are preserved. For instance, the John Carter Brown Library in Providence, Rhode Island, or the famous Mexican Inquisition papers in the Huntington Library, San Marino, California, which contain records of 1993 trials, or the Hesburgh Libraries at the University of Notre Dame Rare Books and Special Collection, the Harley McDavid Inquisition Collection, the Newberry Library in Chicago, which collect the Edward Ayer Collection and the Inquisition Proceedings and Correspondence, or recently I discovered also the Mexican legal documents guarded at the Harvard Law School that are documents accessible only with the internal accounts of the institution. Or, for instance, the Mexican Inquisition collection in the series Original Processos and Correspondence, 1519-1768, guarded at the American Jewish Historical Society in New York. Or, for instance, we have the Spanish colonial manuscript collection, the Conway collection, which is guarded at the Gilchrist Museum Library and Archives in Oklahoma, or also the Library of Congress in DC, in Washington, DC, the Hans Peter Krause collection of Spanish-American documents, which collects 6 items Inquisition of New Spain, 6 items of the Inquisition of New Spain. This list, of course, is not exhaustive, but I think that illustrates the trajectory of Mexican inquisitorial documentation from its creation in colonial Mexico to its current preservation in distant libraries. The fragmentation of the archive complicates the work of historians today. No single repository contains the full documentary legacy of the Mexican Inquisition. Reconstructing its history requires tracing the movements of documents across oceans and centuries, piecing together a mosaic scattered by political and historical forces. Let me give you just 2 quick examples directly linked with my own current research. For instance, in my PhD dissertation and the book I wrote from this dissertation, I had reconstructed the trial of Gaspar Riveros Vasconcelos, a mulatto active in Mexico City in the 1640s. And while searching for related trials in the collections of the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico City, I eventually found crucial documents at the Biblioteca Nacional de Antropología y Historia, a source that we can see here. Maybe it's a little small, but here we can read Gaspar Riveros Vasconcelos that, let's say, give this testimony against an astrologist. And so this is a source coming from another archive, from another library, which allow me to enrich the case study with new insights. Or another example comes from my research stay, as I told before, at Harvard University, where I discovered a small corpus of documents at the Harvard Law School, the Mexican legal documents, which consist of just a few manuscript files of the Mexican Inquisition. And among these documents, I found, for instance, a printed document titled Mandamiento de Prisión para Esclavos Fuera de esta Ciudad, o sea, fuera de la Ciudad de México, which is central to my ongoing project on the legal history of the Mexican Inquisition. Whether we call this rediscovery or serendipity, I argue that reconstructing as much as possible the archive is fundamental not only for recovering its integrity, but also for making full use of it in its complexity. In short, I argue that reconstructing the dispersed archives is not just about preservation, it is about unlocking new perspectives on colonial Mexican society and the global dimensions of the Inquisition. To conclude, the Mexican Inquisition was one of the earliest and most expansive institutions of the Spanish monarchy in the Americas. Its activities produced a documentary corpus that reflects both the reach of the Catholic monarchy and the fragility of colonial archives. The documents were preserved precariously in Mexico City, though better than some other archives. After independence, these archives were fragmented, and today they are scattered across the world. These records have their own history, a history of preservation, of loss, and dispersion. Reconstructing this genealogy of documentation allows us to see not only how the Inquisition functioned, but also how archives have been shaped by natural disasters, political upheavals, and transoceanic circulation. For historians today, the challenge is to navigate this fragmented archive, bringing together dispersed pieces to reconstruct the story of the Mexican Inquisition and to gain insight into the broader dynamics of colonial and early modern governance. In short, reconstructing the dispersed archives is not only about preserving its integrity, but also about unlocking new perspectives on colonial Mexican society and its global connections. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matteo. I think we will discuss the many points that you have outlined during your presentation. And just to, while you are switching, no, I think you have to switch.
We have to switch?
The seat, yeah, I think it's more effective. Otherwise, we will be... Okay, and while you are switching, so just to put on, let's say, on the stage some keywords, of course, archive, but also libraries and also collections that are actually at the combination, let's say, of the two elements, and probably digital resources and description that now are available can be part of the solution, but we will discuss of this after, of course. I leave the floor to Elena de Anda Camacho, Washington College, that will go on in this discussion and enlighten some points regarding the topic archive of this session. Her paper is entitled Embodying the Archive in Inquisitorial Scholarship. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you so much, Matteo. And just slightly change in the title, just the 1698 Spoleto case of the ACDF. Here we go. It is commonly said that the archive is a resource. Well, first of all, I have to say thank you for everyone who's bringing me here, because I have to say it is a treat just to be in Napoli. It is a treat to escape the United States, even for a little time. As you know, the world is specifically on fire. So thank you, but especially thank you for bringing me to this very nice community of scholars who is kind of my perfect place. So thanks. It is commonly said that the archive is a resource for the knowledge of the past, a symbolic and literal site of memory. It is less commonly said that the archive is a site for control and domination, a product of state power shaped by anger, fear, but also desire, loss, and care. N. Stoller compels us to move from archive as source to archive as subject, and to recognize it as a, quote, repository of codified beliefs that cluster and bear witness to connections between secrecy, the law, and power. Even more ominous is Idea Hartman's approach to the archive, calling it a death sentence, a tomb, an inventory of property in the context of the colonial one. It can also be said that archives are artificial, constructed, opaque, and incomplete. They are shaped by categorizing choices and omissions, and must be considered, as Diana Taylor calls them, the product of a system of selection, or as Antoinette Bourton argues, an artifact of history. Regarding their opacity, Dipesh Chakrabarty notes how the archive hides the history of its own production. In historiographical practice, archives are embedded too with distinct auras. One comes with their sense of place, embodying what Pierre Nora calls a lieu de mémoire. Burton has stressed their sacralization, a dimension that carries an affective component. Through desacralization, the body of the archival text is cherished and treated with astounding care. Archival researchers and guardians alike use gloves, pincers, weights, book beds, and refrain from staying too close, from breathing too close, to preserve their materiality in the years to come. Most of us here confess the heightened pleasure we experience in looking at, touching in, and smelling all musky documents. Beyond their effect in our intellectual pursuits, archival documents play an affectionate role in our academic practice. The second type of archival aura is nonetheless disembodied. It concerns the notion of neutrality. Archival documents are data, not to be mediated by the scholar's ideologies. In this perspective, we function as vehicles for the transmission of knowledge, but never as sentient bodies. Yet in my 20 years working as an archival scholar in the special collections of Vatican City, the Archivio Secreto, the Biblioteca Vaticana, the Archivio del Dicasterio della Propaganda Fede, Trinity College Library, the Lecumberri Palace in Mexico, the National Historical Archive in Spain, or l'Enfer in France's National Library, I have experienced and learned from approaches that anchor in critical race theory, critical archival theory, decolonial, postcolonial, feminist, and gender studies, aim to, if not reconcile, at least combine the affection embedded in archival research with that embodied, relational, reflexive, and ethical approach to historical materials. In this practice, the scholar's body, identity, and affective life encounters the text. This framework, which favors the body and somatic reactions, seeks to engage relationally and ethically with subjects, and especially historically marginalized subjects from the past, to ensure that they find a fairer place into the future. Today, I present a case of study in 17th century Spoleto that I work on the ACDF in the summer of 2023, and which center on incest and violence, compelled me to reflect on the ways in which embodied gender and ethical archival practices are needed when engaging with violence, sexuality, and historically marginalized subjects. As Marco Caracciolo and Karen Kukkonen have recently shown, reading is not only visual or conceptual, instead it's a whole body act that demands an embodied narratology. As in psychological experiments, when people read, they involve the entirety of their bodies, and texts make them aware of their own physicality and of the physicality of reading. Arthur Glenberg, a specialist in embodied cognition, considers the body a meaning-making device, a site in which the intellectual, the emotional, and the somatic are combined. I'm intrigued in how these two theories, the embodied archival ethics framework and embodied cognition, help us to interrogate the way in which the somatic, the emotional, and the intellectual find themselves at work in inquisitorial research. So for context, I work in the summer of 2023 in the ACDF to find cases that inform my forthcoming monograph on the pornographic tradition in the 18th century. A monograph that focuses in the three sex-centered texts produced in the what we call the three main empires of the Enlightenment, which will be the Spanish, the French, and the British, to sketch a poetics of the pornographic tradition that interrogates how, by changing the poetics of a genre, can we modify its politics. Because of this work, I have developed a methodology of cross-referencing sex-centered texts with records of sex practices, many of which reside in inquisitorial archives under the rubrics of acts against natura, lubricity, obscenity, and the like. In my work, I apply a method of close reading that combines narrativization, sexuality and gender theorization, and reception theory, as shown in my monograph, Offensive to Pious Ears, Obscenity and Censorship in 18th Century Spanish Poetry. In this book, by reading against the grain, between the lines, and using what Hartman calls critical fabulation, I narrativize inquisitorial cases and give prominence to both the way in which inquisitorial discourse displays its own poetics or anthropology, and the ways in which between the lines historically silenced individuals find spaces to claim the word. Without certainty and overriding the need to solve the inability of most to speak of being heard, this critical fabulation acknowledges ambiguity and silence to sketch what Hartman considered that which might have been, the things whispered in dark bedrooms and amplify moments of withholding, escape, and possibility, end of quote. When we open these archival spaces, a new experience is established in which the archive is not only a site of control, but also a deposit of resistance, built through the intimacy and relationality between historical and often ahistorical subjects and scholars. In this space, uncertainty is not a failure, but a tool to resist the totalizing and hegemonic way to approach, acquire, and disseminate knowledge. The Spoleto case, In this way, the archives invites discomfort, demands reflexivity, and creates new ways to access and experience knowledge. The Spoleto case demanded from me an emotional, intellectual, and moral engagement. So situated, it is in the Archivio del Dicasterio per la Doctrina della Fede, that we know that was called Archivio della Congregazione della Doctrina della Fede until 2022, and then Santo Ufficio until 1965. As we know, this is an incomplete archive of the activity of the Roman Inquisition, that it can be partially informed by the Dataria, Trinity College Library, and a myriad of satellite archives located across the early modern Christendom. In 2023, I know, I wish I would have known of the Archivio Digitale dell'Inquisizione Romana at that time, but I had to go to the ACDF to do research on site, and so my research focused keywords such as atto venereo, atti impuri, fornicazione, lussuria, sessualità, morale, sessuale, materia del sesto, pollutio, castità, meretrici, and crimes such as stupro, sollecitazione, omosessualità, sodomia, masturbatio, and sortileghe ad amorem. I gather a corpus of texts that took place in the long 18th century and provide, even if incomplete, a snapshot of the main foci of interest for the Roman Inquisition in sexual matters. Archival work, as you know, encompasses long sessions of reading and transcription in which automatization is needed for efficacy, especially for us foreign scholars who work with time limits. When dealing with sexual matters, automatization often serves as a tool for emotional detachment. Nonetheless, cases like Spoleto disturb the often strategic automatization I use by enacting what Luis Althusser will call an interpellation, a call for me to be identified and identifiable vis-a-vis the document. In this process, I was compelled to position myself as a woman, a sexual and sexualized woman, a feminist scholar, and a decolonized woman of color who could or not respond to what Caswell calls a feminist archival appraisal, and use or not what Uma Narayan names our epistemic advantage, or the ability to see in the same topic from a code-switching perspective. In a nutshell, the Spoleto case involves a family composed of a father, Girolamo, a wife, Angela, 3 girls, Rita, Maria, and Elisabetta, a sister-in-law on the wife's side, Maria, and her lover, Michele. In 1698, the girls denounced their father to a Capuchin friar for grooming, raping them, and engaging in sexual acts, noting that he also beat them profusely and was far from being pious. Not only he sexually abused his daughters, Girolamo also engaged in what seems consensual sex with his sister-in-law Maria, and might have played a role in her homicide. The most salient feature of this case is that despite both the sexual and physical cruelty displayed by Girolamo against his daughters and confirmed by witnesses, the Roman Inquisition consistently held back both the inquiry into the stupro and incest crimes as well as the punishment. And instead, it meandered through the branches, focusing on blasphemous prepositions, one in which Girolamo cursed the church's bells, maledi le campane, or on Maria's homicide. The continuous reticence to prosecute him for incest, as well as his alleviated sentence at the end, with 10 years at the galley while Michele got life, refers the complexity of both civil and inquisitorial jurisdictions and a tradition of the blind eye that institutions like the Inquisition have historically sustained vis-a-vis sexual crimes on young women's bodies. To say that reading this case was agonic is an understatement. Visually, there is nothing to suffer about it. It is a long and well-written document, easy to transcribe, although impossible to digest. At every paragraph, I find myself revolted, angry, worried, and ended with a sense of despair that stayed with me long after I left the archive. Impotence described this transcription process because no matter what was said or witnessed, Girolamo continued sexually abusing and beating his daughters as time moved on. Moreover, I felt the urgency for the Inquisition to intervene and anger at the end when I realized that he was not processed by his sexual crimes, but instead for Maria's killing. This experience confronted me with a somatic response in which my entire body reacted negatively to the act of reading, building a physical tension that, once added to strenuous and repeated work, resulted in a cervical herniated disc. And this is the only funny part of this. That's my herniated disc. The main effect on the reader's affection that emanates from the Spoleto case resides in its narrativity. Narratively, the case shows a crescendo in which the fault is clear and yet the pressure to apply punishment is unmet. Here I clarify that far from fiction, narrativization is not a formal component of inquisitorial discourse. Rather, inquisitorial discourse is epideictic or demonstrative, and this dimension informs its deliberative or symbolaiticon form, a process that exists outside inquisitorial discourse and from which we only see its final elocution or sentence. In my presentation, and this is for the longer version, I work on 4 specific points. The first is the women that I'm going to share with you today. And the second one is the inquisitorial reticence to prosecute Girolamo. The third is the play that the wife has in the whole leading the case, like how her testimony kind of leads the case and give her some glimpses of agency. And the last one is the silence of Maria, who is the one killed at the end. The first dimension is the girl's description of their sexual abuse. This narration demands an embodied response to the constant overlapping of sex and different types of violence. As I said, on April 6, 1698, Giuseppe de Bagna states that 24-year-old Chiara and 16-year-old Rita confessed that they engaged in commercio carnale with her father, and Chiara said that it was often made violently. Con la sua forza e violenza mi faceva fare quello, and that it started when she was 11 years old, so 13 years before the denunciation. Although in 1698 his sexual requests stopped, he continued accessing her body without her consent, e fargli certe carezzazie come di mettergli mani in petto e di dargli sfrenatamente dei baci. Anna Rita, her sister, declared on her side that her father groomed her since she was 9 years old, and despite her initial resistance, he got to rape her. Con volermi mettere dentro la sua porcheria, ma perché io mi ritiravo, lui non la metteva dentro, ma poi cresciuta, benché io mi ritirasse, tanto lui con montarmi sopra, metteria la sua porcheria dentro la mia. E questo cominciò da 2 anni e circa, e seguito di più da un anno, e ha avuto a che fare con me moltissime volte. She also reiterates how rape is accompanied with violence, in her case with the threat of a knife. Posandomi sopra del letto mi montava sopra e quando non mi prendeva a forza, portando lui sempre addosso un coltellaccio, mi diceva che voleva con quello ammassarmi se non facevo a modo suo e io per paura lo lasciavo fare. End of quote. In a late deposition, the third daughter, Elisabetta, 9-year-old, also expresses her reticence to be near her father, stated that no voce restare con esso lui in campagna. And although she and her mother report that he only groomed her, she also comments that mi cominciava a fare le carezze con mettermi le mani nel petto e con baciarmi. The points in which these 3 girls' denunciations concur are the enacting of 2 specific crimes, stupro and incest. In passing, both girls provided 2 bits of information that seem innocuous and yet become fundamental for the case and the empowerment of justice. The first one is that her father curses the bells and tells them that monks and priests should be excommunicated when they ring them. And the second, that whenever they told their father that having sex with him was a sin, he denied it and ordered them not to confess it, che di tal cosa non mi confessassi e non ne dicesse niente a nessuno. In this respect, the reader experiences not only the simultaneity of sexual crimes as they are being told, but the combination of fear and abuse enacted by the very person who was supposed to be their caregiver. Next to these feelings, there's a second part of somatic response in the girls' testimonies connected to the midwife's inspection of their pudenda. These descriptions confront the reader not only with forensic data, but with the materiality of the girls' bodies, that once again is trespass of their intimacy under the name of the law this time. From these reports, we know che Chiara è sverginata e circa Rita che una mamma disse che è deflorata perché con le sue dita ha toccato che il panicolo che hanno le vergini è rotto, che è ben vero che ha osservato non essere detta tanto rotta nella natura quanto Chiara. L'altra mamma disse che li ha toccata con le sue mani nella natura e ha trovato e conosciuto che è vergine, perché il panicolo che sogliano avere le stelle l'ha ritrovato intatto e senza alcuna lesione, e che appena ha potuto nella di lei natura mettere un tattino del suo dito col quale ha subito toccato il panicolo virginale. In this inspection, the midwives make assessments of the openness versus the stricture of the girls, not only trespassing their intimacy, but also making value statements about their womanhood. This fragment interpellates a female reader as to how our bodies, our sexualized bodies, can be read and valued by an external gaze. As noted by Depeche Chakrabarti, in archival research, viscera is actualized in the act of witnessing, and the Spoleto case, the inspection of the young girls, pudenda, confronts the reader with visceral and historical assessments of the female condition. It is at the realization of the imagined tensions that took place outside the inquisitorial space in the everyday of individuals subjected to unrelentless abuse that embodying reading emerges. It is challenges to leave the archive as a foreign scholar and immerse yourself in the richness of a culture after you have faced this kind of hardship. In moments like this, the archive is no longer a resource, it is an affective and relational space. In this regard, I would like to restate how scholarly theories that develop an embodied approach to archival research enable us to renew our methodologies and advance an ethical, political, and even epistemological shift that moves beyond the archive into our society at large. And here I just want to pretty much just touch on 3 points. And one is Khadija Harman's theory about the need to embody archival research. And she says we need to be the historian of the multitude and grapple with the power and authority of the archive and the limits it set on what can be known. And Anne Svetkovich considers, that we bond with, especially with the inquisitorial archive through trauma, but we shouldn't see trauma as, a space for sensationalism, but rather, or to use moral condescension, like, oh, poor you, poor victims, but rather as a place to make documents significant and to relate to people. Diana Taylor also uses the idea of archival affection in order to promote an epistemological shift in which knowledge is sort of modified as just data acquisition. In closing, my participation invites us to bring our affectionate bodies to the regimental structure of the very beloved archives we cherish. As Rosen states, it is imperative to recognize that, I quote, leveraging the power of archives is not the politicization of a neutral craft, but the humanizing of an inevitable political craft. And here I just want to again, bring down the 3 specific instances that are actively engaging with the futurity of the archive. I will say one of them is the project of the digital inquisitions. The second one will be conferences like this. And more importantly for me is the community of archivists who really are very kind to me at all times that I visit the archives, and that I feel that also have a very strong affectionate relationship because we both share the love for all musky smells. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for the organizers.
Thank you, Elena. I think a lot of other themes and topics are involved and have been raised by your paper, and we will discuss them. But of course, so also the ethical dimension of our research, our positioning as a researcher, while exploring, navigating, or interrogating the archive is, of course, more than relevant, I think crucial, and is also a thing that on which we have to reflect while making our research or thinking our research. And thank you, but we will discuss all the input given by the papers in the final part of this session. I now introduce Riccardo Bonafè, University of Tor Vergata, Rome. Yeah.
I only want to remember to everybody that there's in the Sala della Principessa, which is just here, you can try this virtual experience of mystic we're trying to realize with our friends of come si chiama? Relab. They can let you try if you want. They're just outside here if you want. Sorry.
Thank you, Vittoria. And yeah, it's and thankful to all of you, of course, for your time when testing this virtual experience that is, of course, part of our dissemination plan in the project. And I introduce again Riccardo Bonafè. Thanks to him for being here, for attending University of Tor Vergata, Rome. And from restoration, so his paper is entitled "From Restoration to the Risorgimento: The Last Historical Phase of the Bolognese Inquisition Through Its Survived Documentation." The floor is to you, Riccardo.
Thank you so much, Matteo, and good morning, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to thank the scientific committee for accepting my presentation, thus giving me the opportunity to illustrate the results of this very intriguing research aimed at bringing to light despite the gaps found, the documentation relating to the Inquisition of Bologna from the moment of its re-establishment, which took place between 1826 and 1827 after the first Napoleonic closure in 1796, until its definitive suppression in 1859 due to the completion of the Italian Risorgimento process. Likewise, I'd like to thank Silvia Toppetta for the communications provided to us over the past few months. As announced, the aim of my report will be to provide you with a detailed overview of the archival documentation used to reconstruct the events of the Bolognese Holy Office during its last century of existence. Before delving into the matter, however, I believe it would be useful to briefly focus on the status of studies concerning the 19th century Roman Inquisition and those concerning the local Inquisition in order to better contextualize the historical and historiographical framework within which I conducted my research. In January 1998, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger decreed the opening of the archive of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now Dicastery. From that moment on, researchers have been able to explore the rich documentation preserved in the collection of the Index of Forbidden Books, the Roman Holy Office, and the Inquisition of Siena. Net of the losses suffered by the Central Archive of the Inquisition over the centuries, added to those that occur in some provincial offices in conjunction with the 18th century suppression, historiography has produced a considerable number of studies on the Roman Tribunal of the Faith. The works of Adriano Prosperi, Giovanni Romeo, Andrea Del Col, Elena Brambilla, John Tedeschi, and Christopher Black in particular offer a wealth of comprehensive information on the Roman Inquisition from the Middle Age to modern era, not forgetting, of course, the equally important achievement of the 2010 edition of the Dizionario Storico dell'Inquisizione. One last author who deserves a mention here is Vincenzo Lavegna, who, in 2023, in his essay, The Roman Inquisition, the Center, the Paraphrase, and the Papacy, offers an updated historiographical account of the results obtained and those still to be achieved in the field of research on the Roman Holy Office. Among the paths that scholars should explore more extensively in the future is undoubtedly the one concerning the 19th century, which is absent from the volumes mentioned earlier, with the sole exception of that of Del Col. Although interest in the 19th century has increased in recent years, as demonstrated by the works of David Armando Andrea Cicerchia, further efforts need to be made in relation to previous centuries in attempt to confirm or refute the thesis that the 19th century Holy Office should be dismissed as a tire remnant of the past. If scholars turn their attention to the work of the congregation and the less explored work of its provincial branches, which were re-established in this century only in the papal state, they will be able to acquire the tools necessary to contextualize the work of the tribunals in an age in which, alongside the usual areas of intervention, there were new ones aimed at repressing the conspiracies hatched by secret sects and liberal movements. Restored in May 1814, the Congregation of the Holy Office soon resumed its work of safeguarding the faith and the temporal and spiritual power of the Pope. As an irreplaceable bulwark of orthodoxy, it restarts its own territorial structure during the Restoration under the impetus of the conservative wing of the College of Cardinals, known as the Zelante. Armando's studies in this regard have shown that, starting from September 1815, Pope Pius VII ordered the reopening of the courts of Perugia, Gubbio, Spoleto, and Pesaro, besides the Vicariate of Civitavecchia, while in December 1824, at the beginning of the pontificate of Leo XII, those of Ancona, Fermo, Faenza, and Bologna were restored, together with the implementation of a series of measures aimed at reinvigorating the prestige and power of the institution itself. Thus, the Court of Bologna returned to playing a prominent role in papal policies for the defense of Catholicism and ecclesiastical authority. From a historiographical point of view, the Bolognese Inquisition is one of the most explored tribunals. As a matter of fact, there are several contributions dedicated to it, which provide a detailed overview of the long period between the end of the 15th century and 1859. The first author who deserves mention is Antonio Battistella, who in 1905 published the volume Il Santo Ufficio e la Riforma Religiosa in Bologna, in which he investigated the local documentation produced by the ecclesiastical institution and retraced the main historical and judicial events. However, there are two important limitations to his work. The first one is that, obviously, the Central Archive of the Holy Office was not open for consultation at the time, thus depriving him of an important wealth of resources. The second one concerns the absence of references to 19th century events. After Battistella, the main scholars who have devoted detailed studies to the Bolognese Inquisition are Guido Dall'Oglio and Gianluca Del Rico. Regarding the former, I'd like to mention his essay, published in 2008, L'attività dell'Inquisizione di Bologna dal XV al XVIII secolo. This work is crucial for gaining a comprehensive overview of the long history of the local court of faith, as it highlights, century by century, the main areas of intervention and related issues. In addition, it reflects on the significant role of relations between the center and the periphery in the coordination of judicial activities and the management of the court's daily life. As for Del Rico, I refer to his book, published in 2012, L'Inquisizione di Bologna e la Congregazione del Santo Uffizio alla fine del XVII secolo, as a work that is equally useful for gaining an accurate historical and historiographical overview, as well as documentary evidence of the activities of the city's Holy Office and its relation with Rome in the modern age. However, this contribution also has a significant limitation, namely the almost total absence of references to the 19th century events. A change of course occurred in 2015, when David Armando, in a volume dedicated to the long episcopate of Cardinal Carlo Pizzoni, devoted a detailed account to the Holy Office in Bologna, covering the period from 1815 to 1859. More recent, instead, is Andreas Ferri's contribution, Inquisitore Assolto, devoted to the biographical reconstruction of the last Inquisitor of Bologna, Father Pier Gaetano Feletti, well known in historiography as one of the protagonists of the famous Edgardo Mortara's affair. Although they have finally shed light on the last historical phase of the Bolognese Inquisition, the work cited need to be extended with more in-depth research in order to explore the work of the tribunal in a society which was very different from the one before the French Revolution. Finally, I'd like to note that Armando and Ferri relied in their works almost exclusively on sources from the archive of the Dicastery for Doctrine of the Faith, while local sources have not yet been explored. The essays by Armando and Ferri, together with my last archival researches, have led me to propose a possible historical chronological overview of the Bolognese Holy Office in the 19th century. The first period spanned from 1815 to 1827, during which only Archbishop Opizzoni directed the affairs of the Inquisition. The second one took place between 1827 and 1832, and was marked by the re-establishment of the tribunal. As a matter of fact, in December 1824, Pope Leo XII ordered the reopening of some of the state's inquisitorial offices, including the one in Bologna, appointing Friar Mariano Medici to head it. However, due to resistance from the Archbishop, it was not until early 1826 that the Inquisition regained, albeit partially, its premises, while Medici obtained from Rome the formal license as Inquisitor a year later. The third phase can be placed between 1833 and 1839, and was characterized by the absence of an official inquisitor, meaning that Medici's successor, Angelo Maria Ancarani, remained infermo and never took possession of the Bolognese office. During these transitional years, indeed, the office was exercised by his vicar, Friar Filippo Bertolotti. The last period, finally, can be dated between 1839 and 1859, during which the Inquisition was led by Father Feletti, who worked hard to strengthen its prerogatives and increase its operational efficiency by, among other things, reviving the reopening of the territorial vicariates and repeatedly coming into conflict with Opizzoni. Turning our attention to the archived documents, it is necessary to make an important preliminary remark. In contrast with the modern age, for the 19th century, except for the ADDF, the documents are much fewer in number and more difficult to locate. However, I will provide you a precise inventory of what has been found during the research. Starting from the ADDF, Sanctum Officium Fund, there are several series hosting materials on the Bolognese Inquisition. Certainly, the one of the Stanza Storica is the most substantial. The EE1D file, entitled Inquisizione di Bologna, is one of the main ones. It provides a detailed account of the court's activities from 1827 to 1859, with a particular focus on Feletti's 20-year tenure. Leafing through its contents, it is possible to find, especially, the list of licensed members who form the family of the Bolognese Tribunal and its 4 vicariates of Pieve di Cento, Cento, Medicina, and San Giovanni in Persiceto, as well as the correspondence between Bologna and Rome regarding their appointments, the records of each trial held between 1836 and 1837 against 2 Jewish merchants from Cento for possession and sale of forbidden books. Finally, the numerous exchanges of letters between Medici and Bertolotti with Vincenzo Vedrani, the vicar of Cento, on the management of the tribunal's activities, especially on the surveillance of the Jews of the local ghetto. Also included in the Stanza Storica, I recall the presence of several files, above all CC5M6, useful for reconstructing the events concerning the Jews of the ghetto of Cento and those residing in the Bolognese area. Remaining on the Jewish theme, it is also worth mentioning the series Dubbia circa Baptism, which contains an extensive documentation on some cases of suspicious baptism administered to Jewish children by Christian Metz, and that of materie diverse. Regarding the other macro theme of press censorship, the Censura Librorum series contains 3 important trials from the period 1815-1859 carried out by the Congregation of the Holy Office against the work of Angelo Ridolfi, Giovanni Vicini, and Pietro Cavalieri. Finally, concerning the issue of liberal sects, I like to point out the very interest of some files kept in the Materie Diverse series, particularly the number 35 of 1847-1, entitled Colpo di pistola esploso nella chiesa di San Domenico di Bologna la sera del 4 agosto 1847. Obviously, in addition to the privilege series, the registers of the Decreta Sancti Officii need to be consulted to obtain more detailed information on the activities of the local tribunal. Focusing on the Bolognese archives, the collections containing inquisitorial material in the Archiepiscopal Archive are mainly the Segreteria Arcivescovile and the Cancelleria Ecclesiastica. Regarding the former, I would mention 2 voluminous files dating from the 3-year period 1824-1827 concerning the voluminous correspondence between Opizzoni, the Congregation of the Holy Office, and the parish priest of Cento regarding the Jews of the local ghetto. As for the latter, the series Revisione dei Libri delle Stampe allow us to explore, albeit partially, the activity of press control exerted by the Tribunal of Faith, especially during the Feletti's era, while the Atti Ordinari one contains 2 largest files on the affairs Giuseppe Lanfranchini and Giovanni Vicini, which took place between 1826 and 1828. While not something worthy of attention was found for the Archiginnasio Municipal Library and the State Archive, the results obtained for the Dominican Historical Archive were quite satisfactory. As a matter of fact, the Ordo collection preserves the personal files of Mariano Medici and Pier Gaetano Feletti. The Bologna one is useful for reconstructing some aspects of the daily management of the Dominican convent. The Scriptura Varia series, especially file 2, number 18235, contains the notarial deed of Mariano Medici's taking possession of the old premises of the convent belonging to the Inquisition. Finally, the Scriptores collection contains an unpublished manuscript written on an unknown date by the Inquisitor Vincenzo Sallua, who served as judge of the faith in Spoleto, Ancona, and Pesaro, aimed, as he stated in the incipit, at improving Eliseo Masini's famous treatise, Sacro Arsenale. In conclusion, the research conducted in the municipal and parish archives of Cento, Pieve di Cento, Medicina, and San Giovanni in Persiceto yielded negative results, except for the first one. In Cento, indeed, the Municipal Historical Archive preserves a substantial file entitled Ebrei di Cento dal 1820 al 1828, which, already partially studied by Michele Armellini, needs to be correlated with the Jewish documentation identified in the ADDF and in the Archiepiscopal Archive of Bologna. On the other hand, the parish archive of the Collegiate Church of San Biagio in Cento preserves a hitherto unknown file, entitled Ghetto degli Ebrei di Cento secoli XVIII-XIX, which hosts a series of letters sent by Feletti in the 1850s to the Inquisitor Vicar of Cento, Don Lorenzo Bagni, about the Israelites of that era. To end my presentation, the absence of the city's Inquisition archive, which was most likely destroyed during the unification of Italy, combined with the fragmented nature of the sources it produced, doesn't allow, nowadays, a more detailed reconstruction of its historical activities and its institutional development. However, the future and possible discovery of other material could allow us to retrace its work in a more circumstantial way. Thank you, everyone, for your kind attention.
Thank you, Riccardo, for this path through the Bolognese archive that actually is one of the most interesting cases, given the suppression, the restoration, and so on. And this also can raise some reflection regarding how the archive has also a symbolic value or can be used for political intentions or operation and so on, depending on the context, of course. But we will reflect on this in the discussion, and I'll leave the floor to the last speaker of the first session, that is Miguel Rodriguez Laurenzo, Nova Università de Lisboa, and the title of his paper is The Processus Collection of the Lisbon Inquisition in the Archivo Nacional Torre do Tombo and its importance for studying the Goa Inquisition. Thank you, Miguel, and I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Thank you first and foremost to the organizing committee for having me here. As I was listening yesterday to Bruno's presentation, he was mentioning the need to cross-reference several archival collections in order to better achieve results for his own research. And that resonated deeply in me because that is what the Goa Inquisition as an historical object pushes you to do, as the archive has been lost in the early 19th century. So what I'll be presenting today is a collection of documents, inside a collection of documents that are of utmost importance for the study of this tribunal. And that is the Processus or Trial Records collection of the Lisbon Inquisition in our national archives in Portugal. So let me start by saying that the Processus archival collection of the Lisbon Inquisition has likely been the most used of the inquisitorial collections kept at the Tombo National Archives. Having operated in Lisbon from 1537 to 1821, this tribunal's jurisdiction encompassed the Crown's overseas domains in the Atlantic Ocean, including Brazil, Angola, the Atlantic archipelagos, as well as a small portion of central mainland Portugal and North African fortresses. It is no wonder then that a significant number of scholars resorted to the Processus collection since the beginning of the 20th century, at a time when trials attracted most of scholarly attention in the field. Now, curiously enough, scholars working on Asia were also drawn to this particular collection ever since Ana Canas da Cunha uncovered a series of trials of residents in Portuguese cities of Goa and Kochi in the west coast of present-day India, that while concluded by the Lisbon Inquisition, were actually initiated by the diocesan authorities in Goa. Now, these were trials that predated the creation of the Goa Inquisition in 1560. But following the work of Cunha, scholars working on the Portuguese Inquisition came to realize that several other trials concerning Asia existed in this collection. And not only that, unlike the trials that were analyzed by Cunha, these other trials were actually Goa Inquisition trials, or rather copies of trials that were conducted in Goa by that branch of the Inquisition. And this, of course, invites the question, what are these trials doing here? How many are there? What are they about? And why were they sent? So this will be the topic of today's presentation. As I mentioned, the Go Inquisition was created in 1560. The Go Inquisition was, one might say, a counterpart to the Lisbon Inquisition, in the sense that it took and formed an oceanic district encompassing Portuguese possessions in the shores of the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific Seas, and its territorial projections to the hinterland whenever they existed. In practice, the Go Inquisition matched the Estado de India, which we can roughly translate as State of India, if you will, the Portuguese Empire in Asia and East Africa. And this Inquisition also claimed jurisdiction over the many Catholic communities constituted by missionaries operating within royal framework and support, some of which existed in territories well outside formal Portuguese domains, such as China and Persia, and that's why I've made the boundaries of the jurisdictional reach of the Go Inquisition in this rather imprecise manner. The Go Inquisition maintained an open channel of communication with the highest authority of the inquisitorial system, the Inquisitor General, via the sea route linking Lisbon and Goa, the Carreira de India or India Run. So a fleet would sail from Portugal in March or April to take advantage of the westerly winds in the Western Indian Ocean, reaching Goa in September or October. The return trip to Portugal took place in January or February, which meant that inquisitors had to prepare all ordinary paperwork, reports, procedural questions, and other documentation before that time. The fleet was expected to arrive in Lisbon from August onwards, after which the Inquisitor General and his General Council of the Holy Office had until the following March or April to review the matters raised by the Go Inquisitors and provide resolutions. However, by the time their answers were shipped in April, a new set of correspondence had already been dispatched from Goa in February. So this meant that the Goa Inquisitors typically had to wait about a year and a half for a reply to any letter they sent in the best case scenario. Documents sent by the Go Inquisition to Lisbon thus followed this sea route and were prepared with this communication system in mind. But the Go Inquisition had a level of judicial autonomy that dispensed it from sending complete trials to Lisbon to superior revision by the General Council of the Holy Office. So the question remains, why are these trials in the processes collection of the Lisbon Inquisition, a tribunal which in procedural practice was not the hierarchical superior to the Goa Inquisition? So to address this question, I shall engage with the peculiarity of the processes collection of the Lisbon Inquisition, namely the fact that it is not exclusively comprised of processes or trial records. The nearly 18,000 items that make up the trial collection are not all trial records. This number comprises also correspondence, denunciations, inquiries, and other items from all around the district of the Lisbon Inquisition, but also other types of documents sent by the Go Inquisition, not only trials. So this presentation will consider this heterogeneity. And I would like to begin by saying a few words about the India affairs, or Coisas de India, about how they were handled by inquisitorial authorities in Portugal. From the point of view of archival practice, there seems to be a striking difference between how records of communications were handled before and after 1580. The fact that communication with the Go Inquisition required adequation to strict timings from August to March, and that the Go Inquisition lay outside continental Portugal, termed in inquisitorial documentation, not only that as the kingdom, led the secretaries of the General Council of the Holy Office to record communications with this tribunal differently. For instance, a registry of all correspondence sent by the Inquisitor General up to 1583 was divided into two main sections: letters sent to the inquisitions of the kingdom and letters sent to institutions outside Portugal. And here we include the Supreme Council of the Inquisition in Spain, the Roman Congregation of the Holy Office, and the Go Inquisition. There was therefore perception that the India affairs required specific handling and that was reflected first and foremost in archival practice. So the General Council of the Holy Office maintained the practice of dividing the affairs of each tribunals into drawers, gavetas or navetas. And this is failed here. Wow. And the oldest reference I found to such a drawer, in the case of the Go Inquisition, dates from 1578. So presumably this is where documentation pertaining to the Go Inquisition was stored. These documents should be handled by the secretary of the Council of the Holy Office, or since 1585 at least, by the Secretary of the India Affairs, or Secretário das Coisas da Índia, as it's still here, who apparently worked under the Secretary of the General Council of the Holy Office. Information on this secretary is scarce, and I could not find evidence for how long it lasted. So the 1580s seem to have been decisive for the archival practices concerning communication with the Go Inquisition. Even though this tribunal was founded in 1560, the oldest known minutes of letters addressed to it by the Inquisitor General date from the 1580s and were collected in a single volume, which also contains other documents unrelated to the Go Inquisition. And after the mid-1590s, minutes were no longer collected in volumes, but were mostly left unbound, so this practice was discontinued. And this had to do with the fact that letters sent to the Go Inquisition were copied in volumes that were termed Caderno das Coisas da Índia, as you can see on your right-hand side. As for documents received from Goa, they were addressed to the Inquisitor General, yes, and the General Council of the Holy Office. These authorities would later forward them to either the Lisbon Inquisition or to the other two Inquisitions in the kingdom. The Go Inquisition sent an array of different documents, such as letters, sentences, trials, appeals, inquiries, petitions, etc. And we know that some of these documents were stored in the gaveta or drawer of India. And after a while, the Inquisitor Generals and their secretaries felt the need to conduct a better organization of existing papers. So in 1632, when the Inquisitor General Dom Francisco Castro ordered the reorganization of the General Council's archive, its secretary had three types of documents from the Go Inquisition bound. So letters, sentences, and inquiries. And precisely the latter two of these documents can be located at the Processus collection of the Lisbon Inquisition. We do know that the Go Inquisition trials were stored in the vicinity of the Gaveta of India. We know this from an annotation of a ruling by the General Council of the Holy Office on the trial of sodomy concerning a Macau-born priest, Father João de Matos. In 1634, the Inquisitors of Goa reached an impasse with the prosecutor on how to conduct the accusation of Father João de Matos. So the trial was copied and sent to Lisbon, where the General Council provided a ruling on the issue. And at the bottom of the ruling, the Secretary of the Council left a note. These proceedings are in the archive, or secreto, above the wooden drawer. So where was the archive of the General Council located? The General Council functioned in the Palácio dos Estados, a structure that no longer exists in downtown Lisbon. This structure was both the home to the Lisbon Inquisition and the General Council of the Holy Office. Their respective archives were located in the third floor of the palace, or second floor if you count the first one as ground floor. The archives were not located so far from one another. The room in the left belonging to the General Council, and the one on the right to the Lisbon Inquisition. Now, as reported by Giuseppe Marcocci and the Professor Giuseppe Pedro Paiva here, in the early 19th century, the building was partially occupied by the Secretariat of State, which led to the relocation of the archives and to some disarray in the papers of both bodies. The process of reaccommodating the archives following the extinction of the Inquisition in 1821 only exacerbated the state of confusion. So the documents were sent to the public library that same year and to the Royal Archives in 1825. However, during the process of inventory, as reported by Maria do Carmo Jasmins Dias Farinha, many documents that belonged to the General Council were mistakenly considered as part of the Lisbon Inquisition archive and separated from its original context. By 1826, the inventory of the Processus collection numbered 14,654 trials, but after that, the clerks of the National Archive included the miscellaneous papers that were in boxes that both contained trials and other documents in this collection. So the collection was ultimately halted at 17,976 processus, which we can see has nothing to do with the total number of trials actually conducted by the Lisbon Inquisition. And for the purposes of this presentation, it was due to the state of confusion between the archives of the Lisbon Inquisition and the General Council that trials sent by the Go Inquisition to the latter were included in the Processus collection. And it is because of that same reason that this collection includes other material from the Go Inquisition other than trials. So exactly what are we dealing with? In this final part of the presentation, I will propose a typology of the documents sent to the General Council of the Holy Office, focusing on their purposes and the offenses to which they referred. I undertook this analysis by examining the documents as thoroughly as I possibly could, and when the information they contained was insufficient, by cross-referencing them with surviving correspondence. So as for the type of documents, they indicate a clear reference for the organizers of the Processus collection in the 19th century. The clerks conducting the inventory clearly recognized the trials from among the several types of documents and included them in the collection, regardless of their originating in another tribunal. The need to organize the collection quickly and the lack of clear institutional references about the Go Inquisition did not generate the need for an autonomous series. But what is striking is that the trial records are only 53% of the entire body of documents related to the Go Inquisition. The so-called summary of offenses, which sometimes could be confused as trials, make up for 15%. Then denunciations make up for 9%. This significant number may actually be explained by the fact that these were sent at the time when the Go Inquisition had been abolished. So in fact, the Lisbon Inquisition had jurisdiction over the entirety of the Portuguese Empire in Asia and had a commissary working in Goa. So most of these documents were actually sent by the commissary of Goa to likely the Lisbon Inquisition. Exactly. So, and the rest of the group are too variable to group them in consistent categories, to the point where I had to create a category termed procedures, where one might find petitions by defendants, but also petitions by inquisitors, procedures concerning bails, procedures of protest, etc. But the heterogeneity of these documents is best captured by the fact that therein exists 5 auto-de-fe lists and a list of papers sent to the Go Inquisition, none of which remotely resembles a trial. So this clearly demonstrates something that Dias Farinha had already highlighted, namely the fact that after 1826, documents inside the boxes became injudiciously integrated in the Processus collection. So a first survey of these documents still leaves us with many unanswered questions, chief among them the reasons why they were sent from Goa in the first place. For instance, there is still a very high number of documents whose cause for being sent to Lisbon is still undetermined by me, but I remain confident that if I cast a wider net and cross-reference with more documents, I will be able to find the reason why. Nevertheless, there are tendencies that we may highlight. Sending documents as part of procedure is the highest motive for sending documents, especially trials. This happened frequently when the trial was concluded in Goa and the inquisitors opted for sending the culprit to serve a sentence in Portugal, in which case they would send along a copy of the trial or a sentence. So in this case, it is actually possible that these documents were stored by the Lisbon Inquisition because they had to manage the spiritual penances or otherwise of the defendants. And in the same way, the inquisitors opted to transfer the case to Lisbon, well, if those cases would fall under this category. I termed the quality of the case as yet another motive for sending documents to Lisbon, as it is an expression that often appears in the letters of the Goa Inquisition or in the rulings of the trials, when trials were sent after being concluded, or in resolutions of the board of the Goa Inquisition when they were underway. So there is an ambiguity in my choice, in the sense that the Goa Inquisition expects some sort of feedback if the trial had not yet been concluded, but I reserved, so it could be turned also as a procedural question, but I reserved that motive for when a specific doubt or impasse arose and the inquisitors felt they should contact the Inquisitor General and the General Council, which ranks third place, as you can see, of the known reasons. But when you look at these documents from the perspective of types of offenses, you will notice that they encompass no fewer than 25 categories, including trials or denunciations that refer to more than one offense. And this might naturally seem random, but again, there are tendencies that stand out. For instance, there does not seem to be a prevalence amongst these types of crimes that include apostasy, that is, a transition from Catholicism to another religion or law, to use early modern terminology. So there is no striking differences between the number of cases of Judaism, of Islamization, or gentilidad, which is a peculiarity of the Goa Inquisition that denoted apostasy towards the law of the Gentiles, as they termed. But if you include the notion of gentilidades in the plural, which is a broader category that did not necessarily imply apostasy, that number doubles. So this reflects yet another distinctive feature of this tribunal's judicial activity, and that is the high number of trials involving local Christians and their observance of traditional rituals associated with what is today termed Hinduism, which is a feature of the Goa Inquisition ever since the beginning of the 17th century. So what is particularly striking, however, is the number of offenses classified as crimes against the Holy Office, which is a category that encompassed actions hindering the activity of the Inquisition. For instance, the reason for forwarding documents belonging to this category was more often than not the quality of the case. So clearly the inquisitors felt the need to inform the General Inquisitor of the challenges involved in upholding the authority of the Holy Office in Asia. I shall conclude by presenting the geography of offenses. One can say that in a way it reflects the judicial tendencies of the Goa Inquisition over the course of its activities from 1561 to the year it was abolished in 1812. The judicial activity of the tribunal was always more intense in those parts of its district that were either closer to its headquarters or where territorial control of the hinterland was larger, and consequently Christianization efforts and its vigilance were more intense. These were the territories termed in Portuguese as Província do Norte, ou Velhas Conquistas, so Northern Province or all old conquests. As you can see, the city of Goa itself and those two regions make up the bulk of trials and other documents in this collection. But a reasonable number of offenses were committed outside the Estado de India, which actually reflects the practices of crimes such as Islamization and gentilidad or gentilidades, because more often than not, these offenses were committed by people serving as mercenaries under the employ of the sultanates of the subcontinent of India, or when men and women crossed the boundaries of the Portuguese Empire to perform quote, gentilic rituals, end quote, without the risk of being surprised by Portuguese authorities. And so as you may see in this map, geographical distribution is uneven, but it does reflect the basic unevenness that characterized the Go Inquisition's judicial practice in the first place. So I will conclude by saying that the disappearance of the archive has indeed left historians orphans of the same quantity of documents that exist for other tribunals in Portugal, but even Mexico, for instance. But the knowledge of the institutional practices inside the inquisitorial communication system and of the custodial history of the archives may help us overcome, at least in part, the tragedy that was the loss of the Goa Inquisition archive. To this day, the large majority of these documents have not been studied, and many have not even been mentioned once. So to study the Goa Inquisition documents in this collection is thus a good entry point to understand not only the tendencies of the tribunal's judicial activity as a whole, but also the lives of colonial populations otherwise ungraspable, and the challenges facing the inquisitors working 2 oceans across from their superiors. Thank you very much.
Thank you also to Miguel for these very fascinating papers, and also for having so enlarged the scope also of the and show how large can be the let's say the archival hunt that we have to do while researching among the different documentation. So my proposal, given that the coffee break is ready and I think everybody need a pause, is to have the coffee break, then come back at 11:10, very punctual. And at the very end of both the session to discuss all the papers in the morning, because I can guess that many of the following papers will be very well connected also to your communication, and probably it could be more effective also to have a general discussion of all the papers. Okay, so now we can go to the terrace, but we will deliver you there. And I will ask you, è custodita la sala? Ok, possiamo chiuderla? Ok. Okay, I think we can leave your, so if you want to leave your object here, somebody will monitor them. Yeah.